This video is presented by MyBookie.ag. What's up, everybody? We have finally arrived to UFC 266, one of the biggest cards of the year. Exciting fighters, fantastic fights throughout the entire card from prelims all the way to the main event. We have some decent prospects, but most of the fighters on this card are ranked contenders or longtime fan favorite veterans of the game. Even though there is a scarce of legit prospects, the prospects is actually pretty tough to pick. I was going back and forth between Omar Moraes and Uros Medic. They both have tough fights ahead of them, but I'm gonna have to go and pick Uros Medic on this one. He's pretty well rounded, but extremely explosive with his hands, with his knees, with his kicks. He's an extremely exciting prospect to watch. I would have to say the fighter of the night is going to go to Nick Diaz, of course. He's the main attraction to the card. He's making this a long-awaited return, and most people are wondering what he's going to look like in this fight with Robbie Lawler. The banger of the night, probably the most exciting, entertaining fight, is going to go to Dan Hooker versus Nasrat Haqparast. You have the finishing ability, the power of Nasrat Haqparast versus the crushing output that Dan Hooker can deliver. And I have to say the fight of the night is going to go to that main event. Alexander Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega. They're two of the most skilled fighters on the card and can exploit a lot of weaknesses from each other given their styles. And finally, the stake of the night, the fighter who is in hot waters, is going to go to Marlon Moraes. Marlon Moraes has not been doing too well in his career lately, and while on the downtrend, if Marlon Moraes goes and loses to Merab Dvalishvili, it could spell the end of Moraes' run as a contender of the division. But with all that, we're going to go right to the first fight. Dan Hooker versus Nasrat Haqparast. This fight has the looks of being one of the best fights on the card, probably the most entertaining. As you have on one hand, Haqparast is a southpaw fighter with a lot of power in his left hand, whipping right hooks. Not only looking like Kelvin Gastelum, he does do a lot of things that Kelvin does as well on the feet. Southpaw, left-handed heavy, similar combinations, 1-2, a 3-2, the jab overhand, the right hook overhand. That's usually the only combination he throws in a fight. The difference is Nasrat has a different kind of stance. He doesn't bounce around. He likes to lean forward and really dig into his punches around your guard. That's why his punches can look a lot more whipping, but you can see where he could potentially get caught just because of that stance when he's up against someone like Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker has some of the best knees in the game. He doesn't jump into them. There's not really a flying knee. He just throws it up out there. Being a 6', 155-pound fighter, he could do that sort of thing and catch everybody with them. Not only is the height discrepancy with the rest of the division something crazy to see when Dan Hooker competes, but it's the timing of those knees. I would not be shocked at all if Dan Hooker just whips out a knee out there and Haqparast just doesn't see it. But for the most part, Dan Hooker has really good volume. He's a tricky fighter with a lot of feints, and that's something Haqparast is not really used to fighting. There are occasions where Hooker would stand in front of your punches and doesn't really put up much of a guard. He really relies on his chin many times. And there is the X factor of him coming off the first knockout loss in his career due to blows to the head, getting blasted by Michael Chandler. I wonder how Dan Hooker is going to compete after that kind of loss. I don't really think it's going to deter him too much. Dan Hooker seems like a very mentally strong fighter, but you never know these sort of things, man. It even catches the fighter by surprise when they're in there, like they can't pull the trigger for some reason. It wouldn't shock me, coming off a 2-loss streak and that big loss to Michael Chandler, that Dan Hooker might not be able to compete the same way. He has taken a lot of damage in his career, getting kicked to the head so many times by Yair Rodriguez, the Jason Knight fight, the huge loss to Edson Barboza, the Paul Felder fight, the Dustin Poirier fight, and then the Michael Chandler knockout. I mean, the guy's taking some horrendous damage, and Nasrat Haqparast can really throw some power into his shots. I really wonder how Dan Hooker is going to look durability-wise. But for the most part, man, Nasrat doesn't have the best defense. He keeps his head out there. Dan Hooker having such a longer reach and really sets things up behind his jab and his feints. I could see him teeing off on Haqparast from a distance and Haqparast having a hard time of getting his way in. But Hooker is going to have to be very measuring when he throws leg kicks, because he does like to just throw out leg kicks just to feel out the distance and get the timing down on the opponent. But because of Haqparast's stance and the way he lunges into his punches, he can potentially catch Hooker right over those better than most fighters can. But ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I'm going to have to go with Dan Hooker in this one, and I'm going to go by a second round TKO. I think Haqparast's stance, along with his questionable defense on head movements, and he likes to really just hold his hands up, can potentially get him caught by many straight punches, uppercuts, knees from Dan Hooker throughout the entire duration, and that stance doesn't allow him to enter distance that well. Interesting to also see on the betting odds that Dan Hooker is a slight favorite, -145. I do kind of agree with that. And then we go to Marlon Moraes versus Merab Dvalishvili. It just seems like Merab time. What can you really say here, man? It just looks like a bad matchup for Marlon Moraes. In his prime, before taking all the damage, where he was just starching everybody on his path, even the current champion got reaped by Marlon Moraes' kicks, that version of Marlon Moraes would put up a much better fight against Merab. He was a bit better under pressure, really good at finding the check left hook on opponents. He had a very good guillotine. He was explosive with his scrambles. Pressure seemed to always be some sort of hindrance in his style, but he was a lot better before he took the big beating by Henry Cejudo, who mixed up pressure boxing and wrestling very well, and that's something Merab can also kind of replicate to a lesser skilled degree. but still be enough to push this lesser version, the weaker version of Marlon Moraes we see today, beyond his limits. I mean, Marlon Moraes these days cannot really take much of a punch anymore. He's very vulnerable on the back step if you heavily pressure him, and that's what Merab does to all of his opponents. He has good pressure boxing, multifaceted in takedowns, can attempt many different things against Moraes and be successful there, and on the ground he's much better as a grappler when it comes to positioning than Marlon Moraes. He's not going to put himself in that kind of position to potentially get caught by an armbar, a guillotine coming in, and all that sort of stuff. There is a bit of a scare about the guillotine because Marlon Moraes is very good at pulling those, and that can be his last ditch effort to win the fight before the pressure becomes too much, because after one takedown, Moraes is not going to be the same fighter afterward. The fatigue and the damage are going to be far too great for Moraes to make a comeback, in my opinion. So my prediction for this fight, I'm going to have to go with Merab on this one for sure, and I can see a finish, but I think he's going to ride this out to a decision and not do anything too risky, fight his usual kind of fight. And on the betting odds, Merab is a huge favorite. 2.5 to 1 favorite, and I can agree to that. I think he should be a little bit more of a favorite, to be honest here. And then we go to the heavyweight division. The only heavyweight fight on the entire card, Curtis Blaydes versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. A huge contrast of styles here. I mean, the heavyweight division is not known to have very well-rounded fighters, and that's why you're going to see this sort of thing where you have one of the best kickboxers in the heavyweight division versus one of the best wrestlers in the heavyweight division. And historically speaking, usually in the heavyweight division, when you see this sort of matchup, it does favor the wrestler, because heavyweights generally don't have the kind of footwork and the kind of technical takedown defense to thwart that wrestling threat. That's why wrestlers for such a long time has ruled the heavyweight division. So automatically, you can already see the kind of advantages that Curtis Blaydes is going to have against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Not only is he the far better wrestler, he's bigger and longer and more athletic. So that alone can spell you the story of how this fight is probably going to go. But when you look at the details of the fight here, Rozenstruik does not move his feet. He's pretty slow to move around. He's not the fastest on the trigger. He likes to pull on everything you do, which opens up the hips and legs. So just a simple high feint or high jab into a double or single leg takedown is going to be very good for Curtis Blaydes to get this to the ground. But the thing going against Curtis Blaydes is kind of his fight IQ, his decisions in fights. I don't know why Blaydes likes to stand with everybody. I can understand that he is more confident in his striking, more confident in his hands, and he did beat some opponents on the feet. I mean, he TKO'd JDS, and they may have driven him to be overconfident in his striking. But the guy is one of the best wrestlers here. He should be trying to take down everybody from start to finish. For an example, when he fought Derek Lewis, even though he got knocked out for attempting the takedown, he was striking for the most part, and Derek Lewis got his timing and range down. You don't want to do that against someone like Derek Lewis or Jairzinho Rozenstruik. You don't want to strike them too long, where now they can feel at the distance and when you start to go on the attack. So from there, Derek Lewis was able to gauge Curtis Blaydes from a distance and see him going under for a takedown. Whereas if he attempted more takedowns from the start and confuse his opponent, the takedowns are not going to be that easily seen when you mix them up with boxing. But because of so many failed striking attempts from the same distance he likes to shoot takedowns on, it allows someone like Derek Lewis, who's a good counterpuncher, to gauge that distance, and all he was looking for was the takedown. He didn't really care about the punches that Blaydes was throwing at him. Also, him reaching down for the legs is not the kind of takedown you want to see from Curtis Blaydes against these big, powerful counter strikers, and Jairzinho, just like Derek Lewis, is another counterpuncher. So blast double legs and single legs are going to be great weapons for Curtis Blaydes throughout the duration of this fight. So I'm going to go with Curtis Blaydes in this one, but man, his decisions in fights can be pretty self-hazardous. He strikes too long and Jairzinho might put his lights out. Now, my bookie does have Curtis Blaydes as a minus 300. He's a 3-to-1 favorite. On paper, that seems right, but when you throw in fight IQ into this, Curtis Blaydes should not be that big of a favorite. And with that, we go to the big fight everybody's looking forward to. Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler 2. The 17-year rematch that we've been waiting for. There's so many X factors in this fight, it's very hard to know how this is going to go down. Nick Diaz has not fought since 2015 when he fought Anderson Silva. Robbie Lawler has been a lot more active. With that, Nick has not taken as much damage as Lawler has, right? If we look at all the fights that Lawler has went through since Nick Diaz fought Anderson Silva, he went through that crazy war with Rory McDonald. He went through another crazy war with Carlos Condit, which seemed to have changed him. He hasn't been the same since from those fights. He got knocked out cold by Tyron Woodley. He went through another war with Donald Cerrone. He got beat down by RDA, beat down by Colby Covington, and then beat down again by Neil Magny. Right now, he's been on a 4-loss streak, has not won since 2017. Not won in the last 4 years fighting. That could spell trouble for him if he fights Nick Diaz, but at least the guy has been somewhat active. He's been fighting like once a year, whereas Nick Diaz has not fought for the last 6 years. And not only that, Nick Diaz had a party lifestyle where a lot of fans were extremely concerned. And there's rumors by Josh Thompson of him getting knocked out in sparring that Big John McCarthy also said he saw. I don't know how much of that is true, but what we do know is ring rust is a real thing. It affects some fighters more than others, and by Nick Diaz's interviews and the way he's been expressing this fight, expressing his emotions about this fight, it doesn't seem good, man. More importantly than physically, the guy doesn't seem mentally there or mentally in the right place to fight Robbie Lawler right now. Robbie and Nick Diaz are in complete opposites when it comes to the mental part of this fight. Robbie is extremely excited to fight Nick Diaz. He wants to get in there. It's a big opportunity for him. It's a big fight that he's looking for. He's only into big fights these days. He doesn't care about chasing the title and stuff. This fight has lit a fire under him. Nick Diaz, on the other hand, says he doesn't want to do this. He straight up said, I don't want to fight Robbie Lawler. He straight up said, I don't even know why I'm here. And the way he explained his return is like, he needs to be here instead of he wants to be here. That's completely different. He said he tried other things, nothing really worked out, so he came back to fighting. Is almost in the same line of those older guys like Evander Holyfield coming back to fighting to make some money. That's the kind of feeling I get from Nick Diaz when he explained his return. And that is not good riding into this fight. He's fighting an excited Robbie Lawler. And the whole thing about Nick Diaz changing the weight to 185. This fight's not at 170, it's at 185, and Robbie Lawler, even though he's not saying it, he is giving somewhat of an undertone that he is a bit upset about this. He said, if I knew this fight was going to be 185, I wouldn't have lost all that weight a month ago. He does feel like he's going to be fast in the fight, but he doesn't like the fact that he lost so much weight for this when he didn't need to. And if you've seen pictures of Nick Diaz when he kind of announced his return and the pictures of him leading up to this fight, he is in worse shape now than he was like a year ago. And he said like the last 7 months or something has been kind of hard for him. He's giving all the indications that he might lose this fight. Even though Nick has the perfect style against Robbie Lawler, especially the Robbie Lawler these days, the Lawler that allows the opponent to just tee off on him and he turtles up completely. Just keep a high volume of output and Robbie Lawler is going to sit in front of you just bobbing and weaving all day. He did against RDA, he did against Colby Covington, he did against Neil Magny. He just does not throw punches these days. And Nick Diaz could not ask for a better style to go up against. So I'm not saying Nick Diaz is absolutely going to lose this fight. He still has the style to make things work. If he could just tap into that fighter mindset and look to beat this guy instead of looking at all the distractions and all the craziness that he is putting himself down with, he can absolutely go out and win this fight 100%. But with everything riding against him, my prediction for this fight, I'm going to have to go with Robbie Lawler. Robbie is in better spirits. He seems to be better mentally. He's in better physical shape, and he's been more active. It's hard to not go with Robbie Lawler in this one, to be honest here. Even though I'm a huge Nick Diaz fan, objectively have to go with Robbie Lawler. And I'm going to go by a decision, but I can see a late TKO. And according to the betting odds, it was a pick'em fight. It was even on the odds. But now Robbie Lawler is a slight favorite. He's moved up to a -145, where I think they were both like -115. And then we go to the co-main event, the sacrifice of the card. Valentina Shevchenko versus Lauren Murphy. It doesn't really matter who Valentina is fighting these days, unless it's her fighting Nunes or maybe Tatiana Suarez. If it's not one of those two fighters, everybody's the same. Everybody's face is the same. Everybody's style is the same. It doesn't even matter for Shevchenko. But here's the thing. Murphy is well-rounded. She's a scrappy fighter. She's tough and durable and brings a high output, does not gas out. She has a little bit more power than some of Valentina's previous opponents, and she just goes for it. But man, she's so much sloppier. Man, she's even more vulnerable than most of Valentina's previous opponents. Murphy is going to try and make this fight as dirty as possible, but in the meantime, I just see her getting countered. I see her getting taken to the ground. I see her easily getting clinched up. And Valentina is just loving destroying these opponents. I mean, she is not bored of doing it. She's a 14-1 favorite in this fight for a good reason. And my prediction for this fight, I got to go with Valentina Shevchenko. There is a possibility if I'm going to give Murphy any sort of chance, she could toughen her way in through the counter punching, take down Shevchenko, and just try to dominate through volume, a lot of ground and pound, a lot of pressure, and maybe Shevchenko cracks at some point. I mean, that's what Murphy's going to have to rely on and hope on, but I just don't see it happening. So I'm going to go Valentina Shevchenko, and I'm going to go by a third-round submission. And then we go to the main event. Probably the hardest fight to call on this entire card without relying on X factors. Alexander Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega. This is a different kind of fight. Both guys are skilled. I would say overall Volkanovski is the more skilled fighter in most things he does. He has great power. He's fast. But Ortega is a bit of an opportunist. He's not the most skilled fighter in the world. He never really has been. Against Max Holloway, against Korean Zombie, against many fighters he's faced in the past, in many areas of the stand-up game, he is not the more technical fighter, but he just finds an opening. He makes things happen in the fight. It seems like a lot of times he doesn't really have much of a game plan. He just goes out there and fights, and there is always a sense of danger when you fight Ortega. And Volkanovski can sometimes run into trouble. Volkanovski has moments where he's shown to be exceptional defensively. It's hard to crack an opening on this guy. But what Max Holloway has shown us, and what Chad Mendes has shown us in the past, is there are times where Volkanovski will show that chink in the armor when he's moving forward. When he lunges in there with a jab and lunges in there with a long left hook. Or when he backs away from your pressure. The initial back steps and the initial steps forward are when Volkanovski is the most vulnerable, and Ortega could potentially catch a knee on him, an uppercut on him, or potentially pressure Volkanovski enough to search for that opening. What is Volkanovski going to really do if Ortega starts heavily pressuring him on the stand-up? He doesn't want to take him to the ground, and it's going to be hard to brawl with Ortega knowing how durable and powerful the guy is. So he doesn't want to take it to the ground, and he doesn't want to get in too much of a firefight with the guy. He's generally going to want to keep this fight in the center of the octagon where it's pretty neutral, because Volkanovski doesn't have the greatest chin in the world. He got dropped multiple times in his UFC run so far. 2 times by Max Holloway, got dropped by Chad Mendes, but he does have a very good ability to recover from damage. But against Ortega, it doesn't really matter. If he drops Volkanovski, he's going to jump on that guillotine or that triangle or something, and the fight is going to be a wrap. So his recovery in this fight is not necessarily going to be as much of a strength against someone like Brian Ortega. But here's the thing. Even though Volkanovski could show some openings in his aggression and his defense, Ortega's defense is almost always open. He's so much more defenseless than Volkanovski is. He doesn't have the best guard, doesn't have the best head movement. Against Korean Zombie, he showed better footwork to get away from shots, but he still kind of goes to the same sort of things, such as shoulder rolling punches, high elbow guards, and overall just looks to roll with shots. It's hard to do that against someone who feints so many times. Max Holloway did it against Ortega and caught him over and over again off of his feints. Volkanovski is also amazing at throwing feints at the opponent, and that's going to get some of the defensive reactions out of Ortega, which are heavy reactions. When Ortega looks to defend your punches, his defense are in big movements. There's not much slightness to his defense. That's why a feint can draw in such a big reaction, and because of that, someone like Holloway or someone like Volkanovski can tag him with smaller shots that set up off of each other. But the difference here is Volkanovski hits much harder than Holloway does. I don't know if Ortega could take all the big shots from Volkanovski, to be honest here. He's fast, he's powerful, he fights very short, which is naturally going to bring Ortega's hands down. And if Ortega falls into the Philly shell or he starts trying to roll with punches, roll on the feints, Volkanovski is going to attack those legs all day. So my prediction for this fight, I'm going to have to go with Alexander Volkanovski. The only way I can see Brian Ortega win this fight is just making something happen in the moment. Not much of reading patterns, whereas Volkanovski is a more tactical fighter who goes by a strategy. And that's a very contrasting thing between the two fighters. But there is also a difference here that even though Volkanovski does fight on strategy, he is also extremely good under fire, and he showed that against Chad Mendes. Whereas Ortega is not really shown to be that great following some sort of strategy. Whereas on Ortega's side, he hasn't been shown to be as good following a strategy as Volkanovski has been fighting by improvising. So I'm going to go with Alexander Volkanovski in this one, and I'm going to go by a decision win. And Alexander Volkanovski is a -180 on the betting odds, making him a pretty hefty favorite over Brian Ortega, and there's no better place to go to bet on this fight than mybookie.ag, where they have the best lines in the business, and they're moving at a rapid pace. Like I said, Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler, the odds have changed quite a bit in like the last couple days, and there's a lot of big favorites on the card that might be a little bit too wide of a gap in my opinion. Taila Santos versus Roxanne Modafferi has Santos as a -435 favorite, even though Modafferi is much more experienced. She's better on the ground and a lot scrappier than Santos is. Not saying Modafferi should win the fight, but the odds are a little bit too wide in the gap. And then you also have Curtis Blaydes versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik, where Blaydes should be able to win the fight, but given the decisions he makes in a fight, it does give Rozenstruik much more of a chance. And to multiply your earnings, you can go and put your favorite fighters that you think are going to win on a parlay. And MyBookie is doing a special promotion called First Blood. Pretty much what the bet is, if any fighter gets cut open in the fight, you win the bet. It's literally that simple. And as we know, Nick Diaz is on the card, who opens up in every single fight. And this bet is for the main card. We have 5 fights on the main card. 2 of them are title fights. 3 of them are 5-rounders. So it's going to be pretty hard for the octagon to stay dry. In order to participate in this promotion, all you got to do is use the promo code WEASEL to start off with not only doubling your first deposit, but also in order to win the First Blood promotion. This is not a normal thing that MyBookie usually throws at us, so it's best to participate today. Bet anytime, anywhere with mybookie.ag. And that pretty much covers most of the fights here. I mean, again, with the Roxanne Modafferi and Taila Santos fight, Modafferi being that big of an underdog is a bit strange. And even though Jalen Turner versus Uros Medic can possibly be a close fight, I think they are undermeeting Medic's abilities in this one. Jalen Turner is legit, but Medic seems to be hitting another level at this point. And other than that, man, I do agree with most of the odds here. So I hope you guys enjoyed the predictions, and if you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.